Jack Thompson had spent most of his life working in an office. He woke up early every day, wore his clean white shirt, carried his black lunchbox, and came home tired but satisfied. He wasn't a rich man, but he was proud. He paid his bills, supported his wife Sarah, and raised 2 children, Adam and Emily, with love and care. When Jack finally retired at the age of 62, he thought life would feel peaceful. He imagined quiet mornings with a cup of tea, walking through his garden, and reading books he never had time for. But reality felt different. The house, once filled with voices, now echoed with silence. Every room reminded him of someone who wasn't there anymore. Sarah had passed away 3 years ago after a long illness. She had been the heart of the house. She laughed easily, spoke softly, and always knew when Jack needed a smile or a warm meal. Without her, the house didn't feel like home. It was just walls and furniture. His children, now adults with busy lives, called him every few days. Sometimes they visited, but their visits grew shorter over time. They had their families, jobs, and plans. Jack understood they weren't being unkind, but the loneliness crept in quietly and stayed like an uninvited guest. One afternoon, Jack stood by the window holding a photo of Sarah. It was from their 25th wedding anniversary. She wore a red dress, smiling like she always did. Jack whispered to the photo, "I thought we'd grow old together." His eyes watered, but he wiped the tears quickly. He hated crying. He never used to cry. But now, the silence around him often broke him. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Adam. "Dad, I won't be able to visit this weekend. There's a meeting at work. Maybe next week?" Jack paused, then answered with a steady voice, "Of course, son. Don't worry. I'm fine." But he wasn't. After the call, he sat on the sofa, staring at the empty space beside him. That used to be Sarah's seat. Her favorite cushion was still there. He hadn't moved it. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The ticking clock on. The wall sounded louder than ever. Jack turned from side to side, wondering how many more nights he would spend alone like this. He had a house, money, food, but something important was missing. He didn't feel alive. He only felt forgotten. The next morning, Jack tried to distract himself. He cleaned the kitchen, watered the plants, and even tried to bake a cake, though he had no idea how. The cake was a disaster, but the act of trying made him smile. Just a little. In the afternoon, he saw his neighbor John walking slowly past the gate. Jack called out, "Hey John, want a cup of tea?" John smiled. "Sure, I'd like that." The 2 old men sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching birds fly by. "Feels quiet these days," John said after a pause. Jack nodded. "Too quiet." John looked at Jack and said, "You ever think about what happens if we're completely alone one day?" Jack didn't answer. He just looked down at his cup. The thought had already been haunting him. What if one day no one calls? What if he falls, sick, and no one knows? What if he becomes just another old man people remember only after he's gone? As John left that evening, Jack stood at the doorway watching the sunset. The sky was orange and purple, beautiful yet lonely. He thought about John's question again. It wasn't just a passing thought. It was real, and it needed answers. He walked back inside, stood in the center of the living room, and whispered to himself, "I have to do something. I can't live like this anymore." That night, Jack took out an old notebook. He wrote one sentence on the first page. "If I want to live again, I need to stop waiting." He didn't know exactly what to do next, but writing that sentence felt like a first step. He didn't want pity. He didn't want his children to feel guilty. He just wanted to feel like himself again, to feel needed, to laugh, to belong somewhere. Jack didn't sleep much that night, but for the first time in a long while he felt a spark. Not happiness, but hope. And that was enough to start with. Jack woke up the next morning feeling restless. The notebook lay on his bedside table, its pages still mostly empty. The one sentence he had written the night before stared back at him. "If I want to live, again, I need to stop waiting." He didn't know what it meant yet, but something inside him had shifted. He no longer wanted to spend his days counting hours in silence. He made breakfast, toast and eggs, and sat by the window watching the world outside. A young couple jogged past, their laughter floating in the air. It reminded Jack of his youth, the time he and Sarah used to take morning walks. That memory made him smile, but it also stung. Those days were gone. He couldn't go back, but maybe he could still move forward. Later that afternoon, his daughter Emily surprised him with a visit. She brought along her son, Noah, who ran inside and gave Jack a big hug. "Grandpa, I missed you." Jack's heart melted. "I missed you too, champ," he said, kneeling to hug him tight. Emily placed a container of Jack's favorite stew on the table. "I made your favorite," she said, smiling. But her eyes were already looking at her watch. Jack noticed. "You're in a hurry?" he asked gently. "I just stopped by to drop this off," she replied. "I have to pick up Tom in half an E." "Our Noah wanted to see you." Jack nodded, trying not to show his disappointment. "Thank you, Emily. It means a lot." She gave him a quick hug. "We'll stay longer next time, Dad. I promise." As they left, Jack stood at the doorway watching them walk away. Noah turned back and waved. Jack smiled and waved too, but when the door closed, the house fell silent again. The stew sat untouched on the table. Jack wasn't hungry anymore. He sat down and stared at the empty seat across from him. It used to be Sarah's spot. Every meal they had shared was now just a memory. Jack closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying not to cry. The next day, he met John again in the park. They walked slowly, talking about nothing and everything. "Do you ever feel like you've become invisible?" Jack asked suddenly. John nodded. "All the time. People think we're fine just because we say we are." Jack looked at the children playing in the distance. "It's strange. I was always the one people came to. Now it feels like no one really sees me." John stopped, walking. "We need to find something to hold on to, a reason to get out of bed each day." That night, Jack thought about John's words. He didn't want his life to be just about waiting for visits or watching TV. He wanted to live with meaning, even if he was alone. The next morning, Jack put on his coat and left the house early. He walked to the local community center, a place he hadn't visited in years. Inside, there were posters about senior activities: yoga, chess, art, and music. A friendly woman at the front desk smiled at him. "First time here?" she asked. Jack nodded. "It's been a while." "Well," she said, "we're glad you came. Would you like to join the chess club this evening?" Jack hesitated. He hadn't played in years, but something told him to say yes. That evening, he returned. A group of older men sat around a table, laughing and moving pieces on the board. Jack watched for a while, then one of them called out, "Hey, want to join us?" He sat down nervously, unsure if he still remembered the rules. But as the game began, something inside him woke up. He made his first move, and suddenly he wasn't just passing time, he was present, alive, and part of something again. After the game, they shared tea and stories. Jack laughed more that night than he had in months. The warmth of those few hours followed him home. As he opened the door to his house, it didn't feel quite as cold anymore. It wasn't full of voices, but it wasn't empty either. He had made a start. Before bed, Jack opened his notebook again and added a new line under his first sentence. "Today, I chose to live." He smiled, feeling proud. It wasn't a big step, but it was real. For the first time in a long while, Jack didn't dread the morning. He was already thinking about going back to the center, maybe even trying something new. He still missed Sarah. He still wished his children could visit more. But now he wasn't only waiting, he was moving. Slowly, carefully, but forward. Jack returned to the community center the next week, wearing his favorite sweater and a smile that hadn't touched his face in a long time. Something inside him had changed. The center was no longer just a building. It was now a place where he could belong. The chess group welcomed him warmly again. After a few games, they all sat around sipping tea and talking about their lives. As Jack listened, he noticed someone new sitting at a nearby table. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes was sketching something in a notebook. She looked peaceful and full of life. One of the members leaned in and said, "That's Margaret. She joined last month. She paints and writes poems, talks to everyone but keeps her stories close." Later that afternoon, Jack saw Margaret struggling to carry a heavy bag near the exit. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "May I help you with that?" he asked. Margaret smiled, surprised but thankful. "That's very kind. Thank you." They walked together down the sidewalk, talking softly. "I've seen you at the chess table," she said. "And I saw your drawings," Jack replied. "They're beautiful." Margaret laughed. "I just draw what I feel." That single walk turned into a shared routine. Every few days they met at the center. Sometimes they played board games, sometimes they just sat and talked. Margaret had a gentle way of speaking that made Jack feel calm. Her stories were filled with color, even when they talked about her struggles, losing her husband, living far from her children, learning to enjoy life alone. But Margaret was not bitter. She saw the world with bright eyes. She noticed little things. Birds on windows, the way leaves moved in the wind, the taste of tea after a long walk. "You make everything feel important," Jack once told her. Margaret smiled. "Because everything is." As the weeks passed, their bond deepened. They started meeting outside the center, too. They visited parks, had lunch in quiet cafes, and even cooked simple meals together. Jack couldn't remember the last time he had felt so close to someone. One day, after a lovely afternoon walk, they sat on a bench watching children play nearby. Jack turned to Margaret and said, "I didn't think I'd find this kind of joy again. Not after Sarah passed." Margaret looked at him gently. "Love doesn't always leave. Sometimes it returns in a different form." Jack nodded slowly. He didn't feel guilty anymore. What he felt now wasn't a replacement for Sarah. It was something new, quiet, steady, and deeply comforting. One chilly evening, Jack got a fever. His body ached and his head spun. He didn't want to call anyone, but he felt too weak to stand. He picked up his phone and called Margaret. Within 20 minutes, she was at his door. She brought medicine, made him tea, and stayed with him all night. "You didn't have to come," he whispered. Margaret held his hand. "You're not alone, Jack. Not anymore." That night, as he lay in bed, Jack felt safe. For the first time in years, he knew someone truly cared. He looked at Margaret, asleep in the chair beside him, and whispered a soft "thank you" to the stars. The next morning, his son Adam arrived. He had heard from Margaret and rushed over, worried. Seeing Margaret caring for Jack surprised him. He watched as she gently checked his temperature and covered him with a blanket. "Dad, are you okay?" Adam asked. Jack nodded. "I'm better." Margaret took care of everything. Adam looked at her and then back at his father. There was a mix of surprise and relief on his face. As they sat together, Jack explained how Margaret had become part of his life. Adam listened, then smiled. "I'm glad you have someone," he said. "You deserve that." After Adam left, Jack looked at Margaret, who was preparing a bowl of soup. "You've brought light into my life again," he said softly. Margaret chuckled. "I just brought soup." But Jack knew better. She had brought warmth, friendship, and peace into a life that had once felt cold and forgotten. That evening, as they sat by the window watching the sun go down, Jack opened his old notebook again. He wrote, "Today, I felt loved." He closed the notebook with a full heart, knowing that the path ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer felt lonely. Jack and Margaret had created a quiet rhythm. Their days were filled with small joys. Sharing, morning walks, laughing over card games, cooking simple meals, and talking about memories that shaped their lives. They never called it love, but it was something just as deep, companionship that filled the silence, and care that didn't need to be spoken out loud. One day, as Jack trimmed the flowers in the front yard, Margaret walked up the path holding an envelope in her hand. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes looked distant. "My son called," she said. "He's getting married. He wants me to come live with him and his new wife." Jack felt the clippers slip in his fingers. "Oh," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's good news." Margaret nodded, but she didn't look happy. "It is. I think he misses me, wants me close again." Jack forced a smile. That's what every child should do. But deep inside, something broke. He knew what this meant. She would be leaving. The days they shared would stop. The seat across from him at the dinner table would be empty again. The home, once filled with new laughter, would return to the echo of footsteps fading into nothing. That evening, Margaret came by for tea. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky change colors. "I've gotten used to being here," she finally said. "With you. This feels like home." Jack didn't answer right away. He stared at the teacup in his hand. "But your family needs you," he whispered. Margaret nodded slowly. "And you?" He smiled sadly. "I'll be okay. I always am." 2 days later, Jack drove her to the bus station. The ride was quiet, both trying not to speak what their hearts already knew. At the station, Margaret held his hand a little longer than usual. "Promise me you'll keep going. Don't fall back into the dark," she said softly. Jack looked into her eyes. "Only if you promise to visit." She smiled, tears brimming. "I will." But they both knew how life worked. Promises were made with love, but often broken by time. The bus pulled away. Jack stood still, watching it disappear into the horizon. He felt as if something had been ripped from him again. But this time, there were no regrets. Margaret had brought light back into his world. And even if she was leaving, the warmth she left behind stayed. Back at home, the walls felt colder. Her favorite cup sat untouched on the shelf. The chair she used to sit in remained neatly pushed under the table. Jack tried to follow his routine, walking in the park, attending chess games, even visiting the community center. But everything felt quieter. Days turned into weeks. One afternoon, as he sat in the community garden, a group of seniors nearby talked about nursing homes. Jack had never thought about it seriously. But now, the idea tugged at his mind. That evening, he called Adam. "I've been thinking," Jack said, "maybe I should consider moving to a senior home." There was a long pause on the other end. "Are you sure, Dad? I mean, is everything okay?" Jack nodded, even though Adam couldn't see it. "I just think it might be good for me. People around, company, a little more life in the day." Adam and Emily visited that weekend. They sat down with Jack, their voices filled with concern. "Dad, we'll support whatever you decide. We just want you to be happy." Jack smiled. "Happiness isn't always loud, children. Sometimes it's just not feeling forgotten." A few weeks later, Jack moved into a small but cheerful senior residence. There were gardens, a library, group activities, and kind staff. On his first day, he met Mr. Robinson, a friendly man with a love for books. Jack found himself smiling again. Not the old smile he had with Sarah or Margaret, but a new one, shaped by fresh beginnings. He decorated his room with photos. One of Sarah, one of Adam and Emily, and one of Margaret. Her picture sat beside his notebook. That night, Jack added a new line under his previous entry. Today, I accepted change, and it didn't break me. The pain of goodbye hadn't vanished. But in the warm light of the nursing home, with quiet conversations and gentle friendships, Jack was starting to heal. He still missed Margaret. He always would, but he also knew something very important. He had survived the silence once, and now he had found the strength to do it again. Life at the nursing home slowly began to feel familiar. Jack now woke up to the sound of soft chatter in the hallway and the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. He had a small room with a window that let in the morning sun, and a view of the garden where birds gathered every day. He followed a simple routine. Breakfast at 8, a walk in the garden at 10, reading or chatting with other residents in the afternoon, and quiet evenings with tea. It wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. For a man who had once feared the silence, Jack had found comfort in the calm. One day, as he sat under a tree in the yard, he noticed a new resident sitting on a nearby bench. The man looked lost, his shoulders low, eyes staring at nothing. Jack recognized that look. It was the same one he had when Sarah passed away, the same emptiness he had felt when Margaret left. Jack stood, walked over, and sat beside him without saying a word. After a moment, he asked softly, "First day?" The man nodded. "Feels strange, like I left everything behind." Jack smiled gently. "I felt that too, but it gets better." They sat in silence, the way people do when they don't need to say much. Jack didn't push, didn't ask more questions. He just stayed. And somehow, that was enough. That small act of kindness started something new. The man's name was Peter, and over the next few weeks they became friends. Through Peter, Jack learned something important. He still had something to offer. His story, his strength, his ability to listen, they were valuable. He wasn't just an old man filling time. He was someone who could help others walk through the darkness he once knew so well. Jack began volunteering inside the home. He helped new residents adjust, played board games with those who didn't have family nearby, and even started a storytelling circle every Friday evening. He would read short stories, or sometimes just talk about his life, about the factory. Days, about raising Adam and Emily, about Sarah's kindness and Margaret's laughter. People listened. They laughed, they cried, and most importantly, they felt less alone. One evening, after telling a story about his first job as a young boy, a woman named Helen walked up to him and said, "Your stories make me feel alive again, like someone finally understands." Jack smiled. That's all I ever wanted, to be understood. That night he returned to his room, opened his notebook and wrote, "Today I gave someone hope." Weeks turned into months. The garden bloomed. In spring, and Jack's heart felt lighter with each passing day. He missed his old life, yes, but he no longer wished to go back. He had made peace with the past. Adam and Emily visited often now. They noticed the change in their father. He looked healthier, more relaxed, even joyful at times. One afternoon, Adam said, "Dad, you seem more alive here than you did in the house." Jack nodded. "Because I'm needed again. That makes all the difference." One rainy evening, Jack sat by his window with a cup of tea. The rain tapped gently on the glass. He thought of Margaret. He still missed her deeply, but he had stopped feeling angry about her leaving. In a way, her goodbye had taught him how to grow again. Sometimes people leave not to hurt you, but because their journey leads them somewhere else. And that's okay. The door creaked, and Peter stepped in. "Story circle tonight?" Jack smiled. "Of course." He put on his sweater, picked up his notebook, and walked with Peter to the lounge. As he entered, the small group of seniors clapped playfully. "What are we hearing today, Jack?" someone asked. He opened the notebook, looked around, and said, "A story about finding light in unexpected places." Everyone leaned forward. Jack began reading, not from a book, but from his life, about pain, healing, kindness, and courage. As he spoke, the room grew quiet. Each person in that circle saw a part of themselves in his words, and as Jack looked around at the listening faces, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. After the story ended, there was silence. Then soft applause. A few eyes were wet. Jack sat back in his chair, heart full. Later that night, as the home went quiet, Jack returned to his room, opened his notebook, and wrote one final sentence for the day. "Even in old age, there's still a new chapter waiting to be written." He closed the book, turned off the light, and rested with a peaceful smile. Because Jack had learned something many never do. Growing old doesn't mean life is over. Sometimes it's just beginning again.